On a Saturday afternoon in October of 2024, just after 4:30, a black Toyota SUV was heading north on Interstate 15, a few miles south of Halloran Summit Road, near a stretch of pavement marked only by a small green sign, mile marker 154. Inside were three people from Santa Monica, a 9-year-old girl, a 56-year-old man, a 43-year-old woman. For reasons investigators never fully explained, the SUV drifted left, crossed into the center median, and struck a guardrail. It kept moving, angling northeast, until it slammed into a concrete embankment above a drainage channel known locally as Kali Ditch. All three were pronounced dead at the scene. There was no other car involved, no mechanical recall, no weather event, nothing dramatic enough to make the evening news outside Southern California. Just a straight, flat, sunlit highway and three people who didn't make it to wherever they were going. Their names were never released to the public. To this day, they are simply the three people from Santa Monica who died near mile marker 154. Whatever they were driving toward that weekend, a casino weekend, a family visit, a quiet stretch of desert scenery, it was almost certainly the same reason 200,000 other people get on this same freeway in an average week. That is what makes the crash worth sitting with. It didn't happen because these three people did something unusual. It happened on a stretch of road that millions of other people have driven the exact same way, at the exact same speed, in the exact same kind of car, without incident. Somewhere in that gap between all the uneventful trips, and this one lies the entire subject of this account. It is worth asking how a road like this becomes the setting for something like that. Not a mountain pass with switchbacks, not an icy ridgeline, a wide open desert freeway with clear sightlines in almost every direction on a clear afternoon, with nothing else on the road to blame. By the numbers, this stretch of highway has a claim that few others in the country can match. An analysis of federal crash data by a Texas law firm, examining 3 years of fatality analysis reporting system records collected by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, ranked Interstate 15 through San Bernardino County as the highway with the highest number of fatal crashes in the entire United States, 80 of them in that window alone, more than any other single highway corridor in the country. A separate study conducted years earlier put the toll on California's stretch of I-15 above 1,000 deaths since organized record-keeping began. On an average week, more than 200,000 Southern Californians travel this corridor toward Las Vegas, the heaviest surges landing on Fridays and Sundays, when the desert freeway becomes a bumper-to-bumper convoy of tourists, commuters, and freight trucks, moving in the same direction at wildly different speeds. San Bernardino County itself is the largest county by land area in the continental United States, and its portion of I-15 alone accounts for a share of the nation's deadliest highway ranking that dwarfs almost every other stretch of road analyzed. Here is the paradox. Everything that makes this road feel safe is exactly what makes it dangerous. It is straight for miles at a stretch. It is flat. Visibility is close to perfect on a clear day, and in the Mojave, most days are clear. There are no blind curves demanding constant attention, no fog rolling in unannounced, no obvious reason to grip the wheel a little tighter. That absence of visible threat is precisely what invites the mind to wander, the foot to grow heavier on the pedal, the posted 70-mile-an-hour limit to become a suggestion rather than a rule. Highway patrol officials have long identified this exact stretch, through Victorville and Barstow and the open desert beyond, as one of the state's most hazardous corridors, not because the road hides its dangers, but because it doesn't seem to have any. A road that announces its danger gets respected. A road that doesn't gets ignored, right up until it isn't safe anymore. Compare this to the way people instinctively drive through, say, a narrow canyon road with a drop-off on one side. Hands tighten on the wheel. Speed drops without anyone having to think about it. The environment itself is doing the work of keeping the driver alert, because the environment is visibly punishing carelessness. A flat desert interstate does the opposite. It removes every visual cue that would normally trigger caution, while leaving every actual consequence of a mistake fully intact. The guardrail is still there. The median is still there. The speed is, if anything, higher than it would be on a road that looked dangerous. All that's missing is the feeling of danger, and it turns out that feeling was doing more of the safety work than most drivers realize. To understand why this particular strip of desert asphalt carries so much weight, it helps to go back further than the interstate itself, back to a time before there was pavement here at all. Long before anyone paved a lane through the Mojave, this exact corridor was already a route people depended on to survive. Native travelers, and later, Spanish explorers used natural springs scattered across the desert as waypoints, because in a landscape like this, water is the only thing that matters. One of those springs, 7 miles south of what is now the town of Baker, was known simply as Soda Springs, a reliable water source that had already served as a U.S. Army outpost in the 1860s, established to protect travelers moving along an old desert road. That same patch of desert would later become one of the strangest chapters in the entire history of this corridor, and it is worth pausing on because it says something true about the place itself. In 1944, a radio evangelist and self-proclaimed medical doctor named Curtis Howe Springer arrived at Soda Springs and filed a mining claim on nearly 13,000 acres of surrounding desert. He had no real interest in mining. What he built instead was a health resort, which he renamed Zizix, deliberately spelled to be the last word in any alphabetical listing, a marketing trick dressed up as destiny. Springer piped water through boilers to fake the presence of natural hot springs, built a hotel, a church, a private airstrip, and something resembling a castle, and sold visitors on more than 24 invented miracle cures with names like antediluvian tea and the Hollywood pep cocktail. For 3 decades, he ran this operation on land he never legally owned, broadcasting sermons out into the desert air, until the federal government finally determined in the 1970s that his claim had no legal standing and evicted him. Today, the site belongs to California State University's Desert Studies Center, and what's left of Springer's dream sits quietly decaying next to the freeway exit that still bears his invented name. Zizix Road, one of the strangest highway exits anywhere in America, a monument to a man who tried to build something permanent out of desert mirage and got 30 years out of it before the land took it back. It is a small story, but it captures something about this whole stretch of highway. People have always come to this desert, chasing a promise the landscape never actually made them. Some came for miracle cures. Later, most would come for a different kind of miracle, a run of luck at a casino table 3 hours up the road. The desert doesn't care what you're chasing. The interstate that eventually replaced the old wagon roads and 2-lane highways did not appear all at once. This exact route through Cajon Pass across the Mojave into Nevada had already been a wagon road as early as the 1860s, a toll road by the 1870s, and by 1926 it carried the designation of U.S. Route 66 alongside U.S. Route 91, 2 of the most storied highway numbers in American history, running concurrently through the same desert corridor. The 2-lane road through Cajon Pass was widened to 4 lanes by 1950. The freeway that would eventually become Interstate 15 was built through the pass around 1967, essentially paving directly over long stretches of the old Route 66 alignment, erasing much of it, though fragments of the original road can still be found running parallel to the modern freeway if you know where to look. Further north, the freeway through the open desert was built in pieces across the early 1960s, a bypass around Barstow opening in 1961, a stretch through the Cronies Valley under construction by 1963, and the final segment northeast to the Nevada state line opening to freeway standards that same October. What began as a rutted desert track for travelers seeking water became, within a single century, an 8-lane superhighway carrying tens of millions of trips a year between 2 of the largest metropolitan regions in the American West. That growth was not incidental. It was driven, in large part, by a single industry 150 miles up the road. Nevada legalized casino gambling in 1931, and for the next several decades, Los Angeles was the closest major population center with nothing to stop drivers from making the trip. As Las Vegas grew from a rail stopover into a resort destination, the highway connecting it to Southern California grew with it, first as a 2-lane desert road, then a 4-lane highway, then the interstate that exists today, each expansion arriving a few years behind the traffic that had already outgrown the version before it. The economics cut both ways along this route. Towns like Baker and Barstow, which had thrived as stopping points on the old 2-lane Route 66 alignment, found themselves bypassed, rather than served once the interstate replaced the surface road running through their main streets. Travelers who used to have to slow down and drive straight past a town's gas stations and diners could now stay on the freeway and glide by at 70 miles an hour, visible from the road but no longer required to stop in it. Some of these towns adapted by building the kind of roadside spectacle that could pull a freeway driver off the exit ramp anyway. In 1991, a Baker restaurant owner named Willis Heron spent $700,000 building a 134-foot electric thermometer next to his diner, its height chosen to match the hottest temperature ever officially recorded in North America, 134 degrees, measured in nearby Death Valley in July of 1913. Desert winds knocked the thermometer flat within months of its construction. Workers Workers rebuilt it with a concrete core to keep it standing. It still rises over Baker today, marketed as the gateway to Death Valley, one of a small handful of landmarks strong enough to interrupt the hypnotic pull of the open freeway for a few minutes. Not every roadside attraction along this corridor is quite so whimsical. Drive far enough toward the state line and out across the desert floor near Primm, Nevada. 3 enormous towers rise out of the sand, each surrounded by a glittering field of mirrors angled to track the sun. This is the Cajon Solar Electric Generating System, one of the largest concentrated solar power plants ever built, completed in 2014 at a cost of more than $2 billion. It's hundreds of thousands of mirrors capable of powering roughly 140,000 homes by focusing sunlight onto boilers mounted atop towers taller than a 40-story building. Drivers passing at highway speed see it as a strange, glowing mirage shimmering above the desert floor. Man's most literal attempt yet to harness the exact thing that makes this stretch of road so punishing for cars, tires, and human attention spans. That history matters, because the terrain didn't get any less dangerous just because the pavement got smoother, and the corridor's oldest, steepest section has a body count that predates the interstate itself. Cajon Pass, at the southern end of this corridor, has swallowed more than cars over the years. On May 12, 1989, a Southern Pacific freight train descending the steep grade through Cajon Pass lost control after its weight had been miscalculated, and several of its locomotives turned out to have inoperative brakes. It derailed at over 100 miles an hour and plowed directly into a residential neighborhood in San Bernardino, killing 2 train crew members and 2 residents on the ground. Less than 2 weeks later, cleanup crews working near the wreckage accidentally damaged an underground petroleum pipeline running alongside the tracks, and when it ruptured, the resulting explosion killed 2 more people. 6 deaths total, from a single stretch of grade that the freeway now runs directly alongside. It happened again in December of 1994, when another freight train lost its brakes descending the same pass and rear-ended a stopped coal train, causing $4 million in damage, and crews had to jump from moving locomotives to survive. And again, in February of 1996, when a train carrying pesticide tankers derailed on a sharp curve on the same descent. The tankers ruptured and caught fire, and the train's conductor died after jumping to escape the wreck. None of these were highway crashes, but they happened on the exact same grade, carved through the exact same mountains, for the exact same reason drivers struggle with it today: a steep, extended descent that turns momentum into a liability for anything moving too fast to control. The highway running alongside that grade has kept generating its own incidents, year after year, in a tight cluster around the same interchange. In one recent 12-month stretch near Cajon Junction alone, records show a motorcyclist named Donald Post died after colliding with a sedan on the southbound freeway in May of 2025. Weeks earlier, a 5-vehicle collision during heavy fog near the summit injured 6 people. A big rig fire closed lanes and backed up traffic for hours the previous summer. A car went off a southbound embankment that December, requiring a technical rescue to bring the driver out. None of these made national news. Individually, each one reads as a routine traffic incident, the kind every busy freeway interchange generates. Stacked together in the same 12-month window, at the same short stretch of road, they describe something else: a choke point where elevation, fog, truck traffic, and driver fatigue collide with enough regularity that the incidents blur together for the people who live and work nearby. With that history sitting underneath the modern freeway, picture the drive itself, the way hundreds of thousands of people experience it every single week. Leaving the outskirts of San Bernardino, the freeway begins its climb into Cajon Pass, threading between the San Bernardino Mountains and the San Gabriel Mountains along a fault line that carved this gap through solid rock millions of years before anyone built a road through it. Trucks slow to a crawl in the climbing lanes, passenger cars weave around them, runaway truck ramps branch off the southbound descent, gravel-filled emergency exits built for a single purpose, giving a truck with failed brakes somewhere to go besides into the vehicles ahead of it. Cresting the summit, the land opens up, and the character of the drive changes entirely. Hesperia and Victorville spread out along the valley floor, suburban sprawl pushed out into the desert by decades of Southern California growth, subdivisions and strip malls that look, from the freeway, almost identical to the ones left behind an hour earlier, as if the city followed the road out here rather than the other way around. Past Victorville, the towns thin out fast. Billboards for casino buffets and outlet malls stand alone in open dirt lots, addressed to nobody until a car happens to pass. By the time the freeway reaches Barstow, a railroad town where the Union Pacific and BNSF lines still cross the corridor daily, freight cars visible from the highway stretching a mile or more in either direction. You have left the last real urban center behind. From Barstow, it is roughly 110 sparsely inhabited miles of open Mojave Desert to the Nevada state, broken only by the occasional exit. Yermo, then Afton Canyon, a steep-walled gorge cut by the Mojave River that locals have nicknamed the Grand Canyon of the Mojave. Its layered rock visible for a moment off to the east before the highway straightens out again and the canyon disappears behind. Heat shimmer rises off the pavement ahead in visible waves through most of the year, bending the horizon just enough that oncoming cars seem to float rather than drive. Then, eventually, Baker, home to that towering roadside thermometer, its digital numbers visible from more than a mile away, a landmark for generations of desert travelers checking just how hot the day has gotten before deciding whether to push on or pull over. Past Baker, the Zizix Road exit peels off toward Curtis Springer's old ruins, a turn nearly every driver on this freeway has seen and almost none has taken. The freeway climbs almost imperceptibly toward Halloran Summit, then Mountain Pass, the desert here at its most empty. No fences, no structures, nothing but creosote bushes spaced with almost mathematical regularity across the sand in every direction. Before beginning its final descent toward the state line, passing the shimmering mirror field of the Ivampa solar plant glowing white-hot against the brown desert floor. Then Primm, Nevada, where a cluster of casino towers rises directly out of the empty desert floor like a mirage finally made solid. First hint of Las Vegas, still 40-some miles further north, close enough now that some drivers stop counting exits and just watch the odometer. It is on this open run that the dangers begin to stack quietly, one on top of another, each one easy to dismiss on its own and lethal in combination. The first is psychological before it is physical. Monotony. A long, straight road with nothing to react to breeds inattention, and inattention at 75 or 80 miles an hour leaves almost no room for correction. Descriptions of highway hypnosis, the trance-like state that sets in on long, unchanging stretches of road, point to exactly this kind of environment as close to ideal conditions for it. Minimal steering input required, repetitive visual scenery, and a destination still hours away. The mind, deprived of anything new to process, begins filling the gap with something else entirely. The conversation from earlier that day, a problem at work, the math of how much longer the drive will take, and somewhere in that drift, the actual task of driving slides from the center of attention to somewhere near the edge of it, without the driver ever consciously deciding to let it happen. The second is heat. Desert temperatures here regularly climb past 100 degrees in summer, and that kind of sustained heat punishes engines, tires, and radiators that perform perfectly fine everywhere else. A tire already worn thin from months of city driving can fail on this stretch in a way it never would on a cooler coastal freeway, because heat accelerates the breakdown of rubber and the buildup of pressure inside an underinflated tire simultaneously. The same tire that might have lasted another 6 months of ordinary commuting can come apart entirely after 2 or 3 hours of sustained highway speed under 110-degree sun. Blowouts at highway speed on a flat, arrow-straight freeway sound like they should be manageable. They frequently aren't, because there is nothing else to steer around when a driver overcorrects. And the same open median that offers no threat on an ordinary day becomes the exact space a swerving vehicle has room to cross into. The third is glare. The desert sun sitting low and direct in a driver's eyes at exactly the hours when traffic peaks on either end of a Vegas weekend, dawn departures and dusk returns, both aiming drivers almost straight into the light. Unlike a city commute, where buildings and overpasses offer intermittent shade, this stretch of open desert gives the sun nothing to hide behind for 100 miles at a stretch, which means the worst glare of the day can last for the better part of an hour, rather than the few seconds it might take to pass under a bridge. The fourth is fatigue, compounded by the fact that many of these trips begin after a full workday, drivers pushing through darkness on a highway with few lit stretches and long gaps between exits, chasing a Friday night arrival time in Las Vegas that keeps slipping later the longer the drive takes. A driver who leaves Los Angeles at 6 in the evening, already tired from a full day of work, is asking their body to stay alert through the exact hours 9, 10, 11 at night, when its natural alertness is already declining, on a road that offers none of the stimulation a city drive would provide to help keep that alertness up. Layered on top of all of it is speed itself, a road engineered wide and flat enough to make triple digits feel almost manageable, and the sheer density of traffic on peak days, passenger cars and heavy freight trucks sharing lanes at mismatched speeds, weekend travelers weaving between trucks to make up time lost to congestion closer to the city. This corridor is not just a tourist route. It is also one of the primary freight arteries connecting Southern California's ports and warehouses to the Las Vegas Valley and points beyond, which means the same lanes carrying a family sedan at 80 miles an hour are also carrying fully loaded semi-trucks, whose stopping distances are measured in hundreds of feet rather than dozens. And then there are the dangers that arrive rarely, but without warning, and that a driver accustomed to sunny desert conditions is the least prepared to handle. Wind-driven dust and sand, funneled by the same mountain gaps that shape this corridor, can drop visibility to nothing in a matter of seconds. In March of 2016, a sudden dust storm swept across a nearby desert highway outside Lucerne Valley, not far from this same stretch of the Mojave, blinding drivers so completely that at least 15 vehicles, including 2 big rigs, piled into each other within moments. Roughly 24 people were hurt, and 15 miles of roadway had to be shut down. It is the kind of event that can happen, and has happened, anywhere wind and dust and desert traffic intersect in this landscape with almost no warning beyond a darkening horizon. Flash flooding, born from summer monsoon storms that seem to come from nowhere in a landscape defined by its dryness, can turn a dry wash into a wall of water strong enough to undermine an entire lane of pavement. Both have happened on this exact highway, and both illustrate the same uncomfortable truth: a desert road's rare weather. There is one more danger worth naming on its own, because it doesn't cause a crash so much as it decides what happens after one: isolation. Between Barstow and the Nevada state line, there are, for long stretches, only a handful of exits offering fuel, food, or cell coverage. And between those exits, there can be 20 or 30 miles of nothing but 2-lane frontage and open desert on either side. A breakdown here isn't the minor inconvenience it would be on a crowded urban freeway with an exit every mile. It can mean standing on the shoulder in triple-digit heat with no shade for an hour before help arrives, or worse, it can mean the difference between a crash victim reached by paramedics in minutes and one reached in closer to half an hour. The same emptiness that makes this corridor feel peaceful and safe to drive through is the same emptiness that makes every emergency here take longer to resolve than it would almost anywhere else in Southern California. Now consider the faces behind those layered dangers. Real, documented cases, each one teaching something different, none of them repeating the lesson of the last. It would be easy to fill an account like this one with dozens of near-identical crash reports, single-vehicle runoffs, and rear-end collisions that all tell some version of the same story about speed and inattention. That repetition wouldn't add much. What matters more is the range. The fact that this one relatively short stretch of American interstate has produced fatal incidents driven by nearly every category of hazard a road can offer. A single instant of lost control on a clear day, a rare wet weather failure, a fatigue-driven night crash, a sudden environmental hazard that turned into a mass casualty pileup, and an infrastructure failure that required no driver error at all. Taken individually, each is a tragedy. Taken together, they form something closer to a complete taxonomy of what can go wrong on a road like this. The mile marker 154 crash from the cold open carries its own particular lesson, and it is this: nothing about that stretch of road announced danger. No other vehicle forced the SUV off course. The road did not curve unexpectedly or ice over. It was simply desert and pavement, and one moment of lost control that the highway's design gave no room to correct. The lesson here is the flat road's core danger. The driver's overwhelming sense of ease is not a symptom of actual safety. It is the mechanism of the risk. Investigators who reconstruct crashes like this one are often left without a satisfying explanation, because there frequently isn't one. No phone records showing a text message sent at the exact moment of impact. No skid marks indicating a swerve to avoid an animal. No evidence of speed dramatically beyond the limit. Sometimes the honest answer is simply that a driver's attention slipped for a second or two on a road that gave them no reason to think it mattered. And on this particular road, at that particular moment, it mattered more than almost anywhere else it could have happened. Contrast that with February of 2020, at the southern end of the same interstate in North San Diego County. A tour bus slid off for 15 and rolled down an embankment, killing 3 people and injuring 18 more.
We're following developing news out of Fallbrook in San Diego County. At least 3 people are dead and 16 others injured from a horrific bus crash. The bus rolled over and crashed off of the 15 just south of Highway 76 this morning. Traffic is building up in the area and is expected to be slow and even closed in some parts for hours. We'll keep you updated throughout the day.
Investigators pointed to rain and worn tires as contributing factors, a reminder that even a highway famous for sun and desert heat has a second, wetter face, and that Southern California's rare storms catch drivers and their equipment unprepared precisely because bad weather feels like the least likely thing to happen on a road defined by sunshine. The lesson here is different from the Baker crash. It is not overconfidence in clear conditions, but underpreparedness for the conditions nobody plans for. A commercial vehicle inspected and maintained for the 180 dry, sunlit days a Southern California driving season usually offers can still be running on tires that were never truly tested against a wet, degraded road surface, because the opportunity to test them that way almost never arises. The danger wasn't hidden. It was simply rare enough that nobody along the maintenance chain had reason to weight it heavily until the one day it mattered most. Then there's the case of Guadalupe Salazar, a 36-year-old woman from Moreno Valley, killed just before 1:20 in the morning when her pickup truck slammed into the back of a semi-truck trailer parked on the shoulder near Hesperia. She was alone in the vehicle. The lesson in her death is the quietest and most preventable of the cases so far. The deadliest hour on this highway is often not midday, when the desert glare is blinding, but the deep, dark hours of early morning, when a stationary object on the shoulder gives a fatigued driver almost no time to see it, register it, and react. A parked truck at night on a road this straight should be one of the most avoidable hazards imaginable. It is also one of the most common. There is a particular cruelty to this kind of crash that separates it from almost every other case in this account. It required no storm, no chain reaction, no long odds convergence of multiple vehicles making the same mistake at once. It required only one driver, alone, at an hour when the body is naturally at its lowest point of alertness, encountering an object that any daylight glance would have caught with ease. Widen the lens slightly, further up this same interstate, and a fourth case adds a lesson none of the others can teach. In July of 2021, a sudden dust storm swept across I-15 in central Utah, near the town of Cajon, reducing visibility to almost nothing in seconds. Drivers began stopping in the road, unable to see what was ahead of them, and a chain reaction followed. A semi-truck rear-ended a pickup, blocking the freeway, and vehicle after vehicle plowed into the wreckage before anyone further back could react. 22 vehicles were eventually involved. 8 people died. 5 of them were traveling together in a single vehicle. A 15-year-old boy named Cameron Valentine was pulled from the wreck in critical condition and died the following morning. A married couple, Richard and Maricela Lorenzen, were killed together in another car. A young family, Courtney Sawyer, 30, and her children Riggins, 6, and Frankie, just 2 years old, were among the dead as well. A trooper who responded to the scene said afterward that he could not remember a crash this size with this many vehicles and this many fatalities in recent memory. The lesson here is distinct from every case before it. This was not one driver's misjudgment compounding in isolation. It was a chain reaction born from a hazard that gave drivers seconds, not minutes, to make the right decision. And the right decision, safety officials have said afterward, is almost never to keep driving through a wall of blowing dust, hoping it clears. It is to get off the roadway entirely, pull as far onto the shoulder as possible, turn off your lights, and wait, because a car sitting still and dark is a smaller target than a car still trying to find the white line at speed. What makes this case different from the others in this account is scale. A single vehicle crash near Baker takes 3 lives and ends there. A parked truck collision near Hesperia takes 1. A dust storm on an open desert interstate can, in the space of a few seconds, turn an ordinary Sunday drive into a 22-car chain of impacts that no individual driver in that line could have fully seen coming or fully avoided once it started. It is the one hazard on this stretch of highway where an individual driver's caution, however complete, is not always enough on its own, because the danger isn't really the dust. It's the driver 200 feet ahead who reacts to the dust differently than you do. A fifth kind of danger doesn't involve a single crash at all, and it deserves its own place in this account, because it shows that the road itself is not a fixed permanent thing in this landscape. It is only as durable as the desert allows it to be. In September of 2014, the remnants of a tropical storm dumped an enormous amount of rain across the Mojave and southern Nevada in a matter of hours. Floodwater tore through the desert corridor near Moapa, Nevada, scouring out roughly 1,000 feet of pavement on I-15's southbound lanes and washing at least one vehicle off the road entirely. The Interstate, the same interstate that carries 200,000 cars a week toward Las Vegas, was closed for days while crews rebuilt it from scratch. No one needed to make a driving mistake for this one. The desert simply reclaimed a piece of the highway for an afternoon, the same way it eventually reclaimed Curtis Springer's fake hot springs decades earlier. The lesson is the least dramatic of the five, and maybe the most important. This landscape does not consider the road permanent, even when everyone using it does. Every other case in this account is, at its core, a story about a driver's decision to keep going, to pass, to push through one more hour without rest. This one isn't. It is a reminder that even a driver doing everything right, at a reasonable speed, fully alert, can still arrive at a stretch of interstate that simply is not there anymore, because the ground underneath it gave way sometime in the last few hours. There is no defensive driving technique for that. There is only checking road conditions before a trip, and treating a closure notice on a highway you've driven 100 times before as information worth taking seriously rather than a bureaucratic inconvenience. None of this happened because the desert wanted it to. That is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath every one of these stories. Interstate 15 is not malicious. It does not select its victims. It offers no signs of impending catastrophe, no rumble strip warning that this particular Tuesday will be different from the last 1,000 Tuesdays. A driver has made this same trip without incident. It rewards a cautious driver and a reckless one with the same open road right up until the moment it doesn't. That is what makes flat, straight desert highways more dangerous than the ones that announce their danger with hairpin turns and cliffside drops. This one never asks for a driver's attention, so most drivers never think to give it. Zisks sat abandoned by the same principle. Curtis Springer built something that felt, to the people who visited it, like a permanent oasis of health and miracle water. The desert didn't object while he built it. It just waited. 3 decades later, the government took the land back, and the desert has been quietly reclaiming the concrete ever since. The freeway running past that old exit sign operates on the same terms. It doesn't announce when your luck runs out. It just keeps being flat and straight and easy for as long as you're paying attention, and it doesn't notice the moment you stop. The practical warning that follows from all of this is not complicated, but it matters more on this stretch than almost anywhere else, precisely because the danger here is so easy to underestimate. Check your tires before you leave, not after you notice a problem. Heat and worn rubber are a documented factor in some of this highway's worst crashes, and a blowout at 75 miles an hour on a flat, open freeway leaves far less margin than most drivers assume, because there is no shoulder curve or barrier to help absorb an overcorrection, just open median and sometimes a guardrail. Time-long desert drives to avoid the deepest hours of night whenever realistically possible, when fatigue and low visibility around parked vehicles and highway shoulders compound each other in exactly the way that killed Guadalupe Salazar near Hesperia. If a late-night drive is unavoidable, treat every set of taillights on the shoulder as a hazard requiring an immediate lane change, not a curiosity to glance at while passing. Expect the Friday and Sunday surge, and give yourself extra following distance around freight trucks, whose stopping distances are nothing like your own, and whose presence turns any sudden slowdown, for weather, for a crash ahead, for anything, into a chain reaction risk rather than an isolated one. If you find yourself driving into blowing dust or sand anywhere along this corridor, resist the instinct to keep moving toward clearer air. The lesson from the Utah pileup and from the smaller dust storm outside Lucerne Valley years earlier was the same both times. The safest option in a sudden whiteout is almost always to get fully off the traveled roadway. Turn off your headlights so following drivers don't mistake you for a moving vehicle, and wait it out. Staying in the traffic lane hoping to outrun a dust storm is how a single vehicle slowdown becomes a 22 vehicle pileup. Treat rare weather, a summer monsoon cell, a distant storm you can see building over the mountains, as a real threat on this stretch, even though it never looks like one. This highway has been closed for days by flash flooding it wasn't built to withstand, and by rain and worn tires it wasn't stress tested for. Checking a weather forecast before a desert drive is not overcaution. It is one of the only pieces of information this stretch of road will actually give you in advance. Through Cajon Pass, specifically, respect the runaway ramps and climbing lanes for what they are. An acknowledgement built directly into the road's engineering that trucks and steep grades don't always end well together. Give trucks room on the descent, and don't assume a slow-moving big rig in the climbing lane is being overly cautious. It may be exactly as cautious as the grade requires. Carry basic supplies for isolation, not just for breakdown. Water, in particular, matters more here than on almost any other highway most drivers will ever use, because the gap between an exit with services and the next one can stretch to 20 or 30 miles, and a roadside wait in triple-digit heat is its own kind of emergency even before anyone is hurt. A charged phone, a full tank before leaving the last town with a gas station, and a general awareness of exactly how far the next services are. These are not dramatic precautions. They are the ordinary cost of driving through a corridor that offers very little margin for error between towns. And treat the monotony of the drive as the actual hazard it is, not a break from concentration, but the reason concentration is needed most. Roll the windows down for a few minutes. If your attention is drifting, talk to a passenger. Pull off for coffee at one of the small handful of exits between Barstow and the state line, even if you don't need the caffeine, because the point isn't the coffee. It's breaking the hypnotic rhythm of a road that gives your eyes nothing new to process for 60, 70, 90 minutes at a stretch. Somewhere past Halloran Summit, drivers still pass mile marker 154 without a second thought, the way thousands did before that October afternoon, and thousands have since. There is no shrine there, no permanent marker for the 9-year-old girl and the 2 adults who didn't make it past it. No name recorded anywhere public enough for a stranger to learn. Just a green sign, a stretch of guardrail, and the same wide, calm, indifferent desert road running past the ruins of a fake health spa built by a man who once believed he had built something permanent in this exact stretch of sand. He was wrong. The desert doesn't keep anything it doesn't want to. Not a castle, not a hot spring, not a mile marker's worth of asphalt, and not the 3 seconds of attention that would have kept a black SUV between the lines on an otherwise unremarkable Saturday afternoon. Every driver who has ever made this trip and arrived safely, and the overwhelming majority do week after week, year after year, has, in some sense, simply gotten lucky in a way they never had to notice. They didn't drift at the wrong moment. They didn't drive into a wall of dust at the wrong hour. They didn't happen to be the car directly behind the truck that jackknifed, or the car directly ahead of the driver who fell asleep. The road gave them the same flat, silent, undemanding 200 miles it gave everyone else, and this time nothing came of it. That is not a flaw in the story of Interstate 15. It is the entire story. A road this calm should not be able to rank among the deadliest in the country, and the fact that it does is not an accident of statistics. It is the direct, foreseeable result of exactly how calm it manages to feel, mile after mile after mile, all the way to the state line, whether or not anyone behind the wheel is still watching the road.